Founded in 1979, LMN Architects has established itself as a prominent firm known for its innovative and sustainable designs across various project types. The firm has received numerous awards for its work, with its portfolio including projects in convention centers, performing arts venues, academic buildings, and urban developments. Today, we chat with Justin Schwarthoff, architect and sustainable lead, to discuss zero carbon architecture, an initiative in the firm's Path to Zero Carbon program, which explores research and solutions for the significant challenges of the climate crisis.
My name is Justin Schwarthoff. I am a sustainability coordinator and an architect at LMN Architects. We are an architecture firm that is based in Seattle, Washington. And my role is generally to work with all the projects in the office to kind of assess their carbon needs and carbon emissions and try and target reductions on all projects within the office. I also head up the Carbon Leadership Forum Seattle Hub, which is a group of professionals just within the built environment who are working towards carbon reductions. This is anything of engineers, architects, contractors, some product manufacturers, and some clients. So these are just a large group of people who are doing exactly what you're doing on your podcast, just trying to learn from each other and teach each other up. So I am currently running that system out of Seattle. My background is in architecture. I originally came into the field because I was kind of interested in the idea of like sustainable architecture, which was the easy stuff back then, just looking at daylighting and kind of the easy ideas of LEED, of recycling and material procurement that back 20 years ago was pretty simple. We kind of had an idea of where we wanted to go with it, but what we found over the years is that all of those things are useful, but they're not enough to combat climate change. So it's been interesting to watch the whole career evolve over time and to kind of learn more and more about the science behind the issues that we have and to really try and find ways of improving our work. So what we find often is that sustainability, especially in the past, was kind of associated with a cost increase. A lot of people heard the term sustainability and immediately kind of shied away from it because it tended to mean that we had to use better materials. It tended to mean that we had to really adjust our practices to do things in a different way than business as usual. What we're finding now is that, especially on the carbon front, is that it's not much of a cost increase. We can just do the good work that we need to do through design decisions early on and through collaboration with different trades, different engineers, to really highlight targets for reduction. And as long as we get that into the process early on, it tends not to be a major increase in cost or anything. So the big thing that we're focused on now is just making sure that we get everybody into a room early on in the process, during the kind of concept phase and the early schematic design phase, to really have these discussions to find the synergies between the different engineering trades that we have, as well as just different building systems, different construction techniques, things like that, to really dial in our potential for improving our buildings. This idea of net zero or zero carbon architecture, the terminology is something that's actually been a little bit difficult to pin down. In the past, we often would talk about, say, a net zero energy building, and that's something that people are pretty familiar with. It just meant that you have a building that is using energy through the building systems, people's lights, people's heating, cooling, things like that. And as long as the building is producing more energy than it's using, we consider that a net win. So over the course of the year, if you have solar panels, having solar panels on the roof would offset the energy being used from the grid. And as long as we were putting more energy into the grid, that seemed to be enough. We thought that was like the highest point in architectural design at that point, at least architectural sustainability. What we have found over the years is that that's not the whole story. And that's what spurred us on to do this whole Path to Zero Carbon series. Because what we started looking at is, say, with just building energy, the time of energy production matters because you're pulling energy from the grid. That energy that you're pulling from the grid has some sort of carbon emissions associated with it because you're going to have energy from the grid that's getting made from renewables, but also being made from coal plants and different gas-fired peaker plants that go on when there's a high load. And so depending on when you're pulling energy from the grid, those emissions ebb and flow based off of the overall grid mix. And so if you're producing energy at a certain point and putting that into the grid, that may be reducing the overall emissions on the grid, but it also might not be reducing it as much as the amount that you're causing through pulling energy at other times. So that net zero concept for carbon emissions gets a little harder on the operational side. And then if you dig a bit deeper, something that we haven't talked about until recently is the embodied carbon of materials. And the embodied carbon of materials are all the carbon emissions that go into the creation of building materials. And that's over the whole lifespan of it. So from the moment material is being extracted to build the building material to the point that it gets put into a landfill at the end of life. Like, we will look at the entire carbon emissions associated with that and try and track that now. Because it turns out that that actually is a pretty substantial amount of emissions on a project. So when we started looking at this, we realized that there's just more and more emissions associated with the work that we do that really aren't being talked about. And so that's where the Path to Zero Carbon came from. We just started pulling the thread and saw where it would lead us. Like when we, say, for instance, looked at operational emissions and that operational energy, we started looking at the net zero strategy, and then realized that, well, that has relation to when we're producing energy. Can we time shift energy to can we time shift like production to target better times for lower grid emissions? And then looking at kind of the holistic picture of, do we put more carbon emissions into our body carbon of the exterior to kind of reduce our operational emissions going forward? How do you balance that? How do you try and find that right mix of where to use carbon to reduce carbon overall? And so it's been a real exploration. We've been talking with a bunch of different experts in the field. I'd love to say that it's something that we built ourselves, but it really comes from the community. We really kind of value the input of everybody's work that's going on right now, and we're trying to share that and get it out there. We did a renovation for the company Heinz. They bought a building in Seattle. Actually, it's the building that we are in right now. They moved their Seattle headquarters to the 8th floor of our building. And they had just released a bit of guidance on embodied carbon in their building strategy. So they are a developer, and they were trying to really kind of reduce the amount of embodied carbon in the new buildings that they are developing, as well as their existing assets. But one of the things that they didn't have at the time was guidance on interior renovations and how we might target a kind of zero carbon renovation. So when LMN took the project, that was our goal. We knew that zero probably isn't possible on an interior renovation, but we wanted to see what we could do to push the envelope as far as possible, and then to look at how we're doing our studies and how we're doing our design process to really facilitate low carbon design. One of the first things that we noticed is that reuse was a real strong potential for reduction, but we didn't have a good system in place within the design process to kind of focus on reuse. And so what we did is we started looking at the LCA process as a lever so the LCA is the life cycle assessment, and that's looking at the overall life cycle emissions of a project. And on most projects, this starts at the beginning of the project, the kind of blank slate section, or the blank slate idea of the project. We don't pay attention to what comes before because that's in the life cycle assessment of the previous project. And we realized in this situation, if we wanted to kind of focus on reuse and clever reuse of material, we needed to take some ownership over what came before. And so we started playing with the way that LCAs are tracked and recorded, and we started saying that we should take ownership of this existing material and use that as a design guideline, saying that anything that we get rid of that we're not going to find a new use for, or not find a new use for either inside of our project or outside of the project, we're going to take the carbon penalty for the disposal of it. In reality, that's a pretty minor amount of carbon emissions, but it got the project team thinking about what they needed to do to really kind of avoid that penalty. It gave them an incentive to find homes for these high emitting pieces. And also, it allowed us to look at what we'd have to replace. And things like carpet. The carpet in the project was relatively new. Or at least the carpet that was existing in the project was relatively new when the office space was originally abandoned. So we found that it was in great condition, could continue to be used as long as we recontextualize it. And it was also a real high embodied carbon item to replace. So the project team took that on, really focused on like reusing some other materials in the process, and ended up resulting in about a 67% reduction in carbon emissions across the entire renovation. We did the same math, looking at it as if we did a kind of blank slate setup where we would just focus on, say, new emerging material that's very low carbon. And that, if we had gone that route, we would have only hit about a 22% reduction overall. So we hit about 3 times the potential reduction by focusing on reuse as opposed to just material procurement. I think that's really opened the eyes of our project teams in the office, and we're trying to develop a way to recreate that on new projects. It's a rather difficult thing to do. The circular economy is still pretty new and pretty difficult to interact with, but we're trying to develop ways to streamline it, and we're really looking towards that in the future because we think that's a huge opportunity for reductions.
I love that you said that. One of the things that bothers me the most about construction drawings is the one sheet called the demolition sheet, especially with interior innovations. And the action really is unfortunate because all you do is, in one foul swoop, you convert everything to a dashed line, which often represents getting rid of things, and you add some notes saying get rid of things, and it disappears. There's no accountability to what was there. More often than not, there's no real research to if it's reusable or not. You just kind of clean it out off one sheet and then it's forgotten. So it's very admirable to see that there was some accountability and research to what you do in terms of what you have already there.
It's really difficult right now because the mechanisms aren't in place to really benefit the circular economy. There are groups out there that are trying to do better about it. Some cities are actually developing deconstruction ordinances, which are hopefully going to be the first step in supercharging this. But when we were doing it on this project, we had to work with the contractor to identify places for reuse that, if it wasn't within the project, we had to find use for material outside of the project. There was some insulation in the walls that we were able to take out, package up, and then bring over to a group that was helping flood victims repair their homes in the area. So we were able to find a use for that, but that was a lot of extra work on the contractor side that unfortunately is not something that's easily repeatable right now. So we're still trying to find a way to streamline it. One of the big things that seems like it may help is that with the deconstruction ordinances, a lot of the cities are providing laydown space, which is kind of warehouse space or anything that can be used to collect all this material that's being taken out of stuff and store it while it's waiting for the transfer to the new project, which is a huge issue in the circular economy. And it's nice to see that people are starting to plan for this and that it's starting to become a thing that would potentially be solved with future projects. What I would say is to get involved. I know that sounds a little cheesy, but this whole industry is evolving so quickly, and it's being done by community members. And the way that it's being done is that community members are all teaching each other up on it. We only have a small lever in what we do. Like the buildings that I work on we only work on, I think, like 10 to 15 projects a year within the office. And so that's such a small number of projects to work on that it's not going to change the needle of climate change. It's not going to move the needle on climate change at all. So what really helps us is to kind of help teach each other up, because if I learn something new from someone else, then I can apply it to my projects. And if I can share that information to others, then they can apply it to theirs. And next thing you know, we have this snowballing effect of carbon reductions. And then we have more ability to change things, especially when we're all going to manufacturers and figuring out that, hey, this material is really bad. Let's find a way to do it better. And when it's one person pushing on the manufacturer, nothing's going to change. But when it's a whole industry of people pushing on them, that material changes pretty quickly. So I have a lot of hope for what's going to happen in the future, because I've seen a lot of people come together and a lot of really smart people come together and really dive into this problem. And it's been interesting to have all the different voices come in and start looking at questions that I never even knew could be or should be asked. And they're starting to answer these questions, and we're starting to find out more and more about this complex problem and starting to see solutions. So getting everybody involved is the first step, and also the easiest thing anybody can do. There's a lot of resources out there right now.